A reclusive billionaire with a perfect routine marries a practical community organizer for 1 year on paper, just to save a struggling neighborhood center. What starts as a business deal becomes a quiet miracle. Late-night repairs, story-hour laughter, and a viral clip that shows a softer life he never let himself have. But one morning, a tabloid drops a bomb, an old whistleblower's secret, a corporate cover-up, and the claim that the temporary marriage is a scam. Suddenly, the grant is frozen, volunteers feel betrayed, and the woman who said she'd never be bought must choose between trust and survival. Can a man who hid behind control admit the truth, make real amends, and earn a second chance before everything he helped save falls apart? The fog rolled thick across the bay windows of Elliot Marlowe's hillside home, turning the usual panoramic view into a wall of pearl gray. The dense mist clung to the glass like a living thing, obscuring the city lights that normally twinkled below like fallen stars. At precisely 6:30 in the morning, soft classical music began playing through hidden speakers, right on schedule. The gentle strains of Bach filled the empty spaces of the house, marking the start of another meticulously planned day. Elliot was already awake. He'd been up since 5:45, reviewing emails in the blue glow of his tablet. He stood in his kitchen now, watching the coffee maker complete its precisely timed brew cycle. The aroma of dark roast filled the pristine space, mixing with the lingering scent of lemon furniture polish from yesterday's cleaning service. His thermos waited on the counter, positioned exactly where it belonged, its stainless steel surface gleaming under the recessed lighting. The house hummed quietly. Central heating, air filtration, all the systems that kept his glass and steel sanctuary running smoothly. Not a single element out of place or operating below optimal standards. His footsteps echoed on the marble floors as he moved through his morning routine, each action measured and purposeful. The sound bounced off the high ceilings and bare walls, a reminder of the vastness of the space around him. 3 minutes on the Peloton bike, no more, no less. Just enough to get his blood flowing without disrupting his schedule. The digital display tracked his metrics with cold precision, while headlines scrolled across his living room's massive screen. Marlowe Foundation announces $50 million education initiative. Tech mogul's latest philanthropy push makes waves. Elliot barely glanced at them, his breathing steady and controlled as he completed the exact number of revolutions he'd set for himself. In his closet, 5 dress shirts hung perfectly pressed, 1 for each workday. The hangers were spaced exactly 2 inches apart, creating a uniform row of options that required minimal decision-making. He selected today's shirt, a crisp white Oxford, running his fingers along the immaculate collar. The fabric felt cool and smooth beneath his touch, familiar and predictable. Everything in its place, everything under control. He buttoned it methodically from bottom to top, tucking it into charcoal slacks that had been pressed to a razor's edge. At 7:15, his phone buzzed. The device vibrated against the polished surface of his nightstand, the screen lighting up with Tomas's name. Right on time. "Morning, sir." His executive's steady voice came through. "The board summary is ready for your review. The Tokyo numbers came in strong. Our projections were actually conservative this quarter." "Good. Send it through." Elliot's response was clipped, efficient, like everything else in his life. No wasted words, no unnecessary emotion. "Any issues requiring immediate attention?" As he spoke, his eyes drifted to an old photograph tucked away in the corner of his desk. 25 years ago, 2 young men grinning at the camera, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, hair too long, clothes too casual, eyes bright with ambition and the certainty that they would change the world together. Marcus. The memory hit like a physical blow. The day he'd discovered the betrayal. His supposed best friend and business partner, stealing their startup's technology, leaving Elliot with nothing but debt and broken trust. The pain felt as fresh as yesterday, though he'd buried it beneath years of success and careful planning. He turned the photo face down, pushing away the tightness in his chest. That lesson had taught him well. Success required control. Trust was a liability. The empire he'd built since then proved it. Every careful investment, every strategic move, all of it managed with precise distance. People were variables to be accounted for, not connections to be nurtured. The morning news droned on in the background, more coverage of his charitable works. Tech pioneer continues philanthropic legacy. The headlines painted him as a visionary, a generous benefactor to worthy causes. The reporter spoke glowingly about community impact and transformative giving. None of them saw the empty echoes in these marble halls, the calculated nature of each donation, each press release crafted to maintain the exact right image. Philanthropy was just another system to perfect, another way to extend control beyond the borders of his immediate world. His personal assistant, Claire, appeared silently at his study door as he finished his coffee. She moved with practiced efficiency, her sensible shoes making almost no sound on the expensive flooring. Her face, familiar after years of service, showed nothing but professional composure as she slid a manila envelope across his immaculate desk. "From Tomas, sir. He flagged it as something you might want to see personally." Her voice was calm, betraying none of the familiarity that came with years of working closely together. She knew better than to engage him in unnecessary conversation, especially this early. Elliot opened the envelope, finding a municipal notice about funding issues at the Willow Lane Community Center. The building needed significant repairs, and city budget cuts had left it vulnerable to closure. Paperclipped to it was a handwritten note in Tomas's neat script. "This might interest you. The center serves over 200 children in the district where you grew up." He leaned back in his chair, studying the documents in the cool morning light filtering through the fog. Another problem to solve, another situation to control, just the way he preferred it. Yet something about this particular issue tugged at him differently, a slight disruption to the perfect rhythm of his morning. He tapped his finger thoughtfully against the edge of the paper, considering what move to make next. The ancient kettle sputtered and hissed on the counter of Willow Lane Community Center's tiny kitchen, threatening to give up entirely. Maggie Cole eyed it warily while juggling her phone and a stack of volunteer schedules. "Come on, you old thing," she muttered, giving it a gentle pat. Like everything else in the center, the kettle had seen better days. A steady drip from its spout added to the growing puddle beneath it. "Ruth, have you seen the spare coffee filters?" Maggie called out, her voice carrying into the main room. "And has anyone heard from Danny?" Ruth's silver head appeared around the doorframe. At 70-something, she moved with the energy of someone 20 years younger. "Top drawer, dear. And Danny just texted. School debate ran long. Says he'll be here in 10. "Thanks." Maggie found the filters and checked her watch. 3 o'clock. The afternoon programs would start soon, and she still hadn't figured out how to cover Thursday's dinner service. She pushed a strand of dark hair from her face, wishing she'd remembered to grab a hair tie this morning. The main room buzzed with pre-bingo energy. Ruth had taken charge of sorting cards, her arthritis-curved fingers moving with surprising speed. "Margaret Cole, you come sit down before you wear a hole in that floor," she called out. "The schedule will sort itself out." Maggie smiled, despite her exhaustion. "Just like the leaky roof sorted itself out?" "Touche." Ruth chuckled. "But at least Jimmy's nephew patched it for free. Until the next rain." Maggie sank into a folding chair, spreading the papers across a worn card table. The volunteer roster was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Too many gaps, too many needs. The center served over 200 people weekly now, offering meals, after-school programs, senior activities, and emergency assistance. Every service vital, every program running on wishes and duct tape. The municipal grant notice sat heavily in her bag, its requirements burning a hole in her mind. She pulled it out, scanning the highlighted section again. Matching funds will be released upon verification of a named local spouse or guarantor with established community ties, minimum 5 years residency, at the registered address. Still frowning at that thing. Ruth peered over her shoulder. Seems mighty particular about addresses for a community grant. City Ordinance Clause. Maggie rubbed her temples. We can't just change our mailing address. The center has to remain registered here in the old district to qualify for the historical building protection. Without that protection, the developers win. Ruth finished grimly. They both knew what that meant. The neighborhood was changing fast, with luxury condos sprouting up like weeds. The center's building was prime real estate. Danny burst through the door, backpack swinging. Sorry I'm late. Mr. Peterson wouldn't stop talking about the debate format and... He trailed off, reading the room. What's wrong? Maggie forced a smile. Nothing we can't handle. Get started on the after-school snacks? As Danny disappeared into the kitchen, Ruth lowered her voice. How bad is it, really? Without the matching funds, 6 months, maybe less, we'd have to start with laying off the part-time staff, then cutting programs. Maggie's throat tightened. The food pantry would be last, but eventually. There has to be someone who can help. Ruth straightened the bingo cards with sharp movements. What about that tech fellow who helped the women's shelter last year? The quiet one who never wants his name mentioned? Elliot Marlowe. Maggie had heard about him from Sarah next door. He'd anonymously covered the shelter's repair costs after a flood, no strings attached. I thought about it, but nothing. Man's got money and a conscience. Rare combination these days. Maggie opened her laptop, staring at a blank email. Dear Mr. Marlowe. She deleted it. What could she say? Please marry me temporarily so my community center doesn't close. It sounded absurd even in her head. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the center's windows. Bingo wrapped up, volunteers cleaned up, and gradually the building grew quiet. Maggie sat alone in the common room, her phone's dim screen illuminating her face as she scrolled through her contacts. Finding Lisa's number, she pressed call. Her friend had practiced family law for 15 years, if anyone would know about temporary marriage legalities. Lisa, it's Maggie. Quick question. How legally binding would a marriage of convenience need to be for government paperwork? She paused, listening. No, I haven't lost my mind. I'm trying to save the center. As Lisa explained the legal implications, Maggie watched shadows creep across the wall. The center had been her life for 8 years, ever since Tom died. She'd poured everything into it, savings, time, heart. The thought of losing it to a technicality made her stomach knot. Outside, a car alarm chirped. Someone's headlights swept across the room, briefly illuminating the wall of photos. Holiday meals, graduation celebrations, wedding receptions. Hundreds of moments, thousands of lives touched. How many would be affected if they had to close? Maggie ended the call, sitting in the growing darkness. The legal requirements seemed simple enough, but the implications... She wasn't afraid of the marriage part. Romance had taken a back seat in her life long ago, but asking a stranger to entangle their life with hers, even temporarily? The old building creaked around her, settling into night. Somewhere in the kitchen, the kettle dripped steadily into its growing puddle. Each drop seemed to echo the same question. How far would she go to save this place? Elliot's Italian leather shoes clicked against the cracked sidewalk as he made his way down Willow Lane. The neighborhood was different from his usual haunts. Small shops with hand-painted signs, children's bikes chained to fence posts, laundry strung between buildings like festival banners. He felt exposed here, his tailored suit marking him as an outsider. A group of teenagers eyed him from their perch on a corner store stoop. An elderly man sweeping his front step paused to watch him pass. The community center occupied a weathered brick building with green trim, its windows clouded but clean. Through the glass, he could see people moving about. Seniors gathered around card tables, a young mother bouncing a baby on her hip while talking to someone at a desk. Elliot hesitated at the entrance, his hand hovering over the door handle. The last time he'd stepped into a place like this. No. He pushed the memory away and went inside. The interior smelled of coffee and floor polish. Worn but well-maintained furniture filled the space. Mismatched chairs arranged in conversational groups. Bulletin boards covered in flyers and sign-up sheets. A desk fan hummed in the corner, stirring paper notices about upcoming events. "Can I help you?" A silver-haired woman approached, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm just—" Elliot searched for a plausible explanation. "Looking into volunteer opportunities." "Well, bless your heart, I'm Ruth." She beamed at him. "Have a seat right there while I fetch Maggie. She handles all our new volunteers." Before he could protest, Ruth disappeared into a back room. Elliot perched awkwardly on a chair that had seen better days, watching the activity around him. A dark-haired woman, Maggie, he presumed, was directing traffic at the far end of the room. She moved with purposeful energy, clipboard in hand, solving problems as they arose. A teenager needed help with the copy machine. An elderly man couldn't find his reading glasses. A delivery needed signing for. "Danny, could you help Mrs. Chen carry those boxes to the pantry?" Maggie's voice carried clearly across the room. "And Sarah, the youth group starts at 3 today, not 2. We had to adjust for the tutoring program." She handled each request with warm efficiency, her smile genuine but tired. Elliot found himself studying her more closely than he'd intended. This was the woman whose grant application had crossed his desk? "Cookie?" Ruth had materialized beside him, holding out a plate of chocolate chip cookies. "Fresh baked this morning." "Oh, I shouldn't. Nonsense. Everyone needs a cookie now and then." She pressed one into his hand with grandmotherly insistence. The cookie was still warm, slightly crisp at the edges, but soft in the middle. Elliot took a small bite, and something in his chest loosened. When was the last time someone had offered him home-baked anything? "Ruth!" Maggie called from across the room. "Phone for you. It's about the bingo night permits." "Duty calls." Ruth winked at Elliot. "Enjoy that cookie, and don't be a stranger." She hurried off, leaving Elliot with crumbs on his fingers and an unfamiliar feeling in his chest. He watched as Maggie helped an elderly woman with her walker, noting how she adjusted her pace to match the woman's slow steps. The genuine care in the gesture made his throat tight. Back in his office that afternoon, Elliot sat at his polished conference table with Thomas and Patricia Chen, his legal counsel. The municipal notice lay between them like a puzzle piece. "The marriage requirement is unusual," Patricia noted, "but not unprecedented. Similar clauses exist in historical district preservation codes." "And there's no other way around it?" Elliot asked. Thomas shook his head. "We've explored every angle. The center needs a local spouse or guarantor with established community ties to access the matching funds. Moving the registration would void their historical building protection." Patricia tapped her pen against her legal pad. "However, we could structure a temporary marriage contract, 1-year term, legally recognized but with clear dissolution parameters." She began writing. "We'd need joint signatures on grant documentation, proof of cohabitation at the registered address, though that could be satisfied with mail forwarding, and—" She paused, scanning the fine print. quarterly joint public appearances, and 2 counseling sessions to demonstrate community involvement. Counseling sessions? Elliot's eyebrows rose. Standard requirement for community grant recipients. Tomas explained. Ensures ongoing engagement with local services. Elliot stood, walking to his window. Below, the city sprawled out in neat grids, everything in its place. A temporary marriage was logical, practical, a simple solution to a complex problem. No different from any other business arrangement. He thought of the cookie crumbs on his fingers, the warmth in Ruth's smile, the way Maggie moved through the center like its beating heart. Something tugged at him, an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Draw up the contract," he said finally, turning back to face them. Standard terms, clear exit clause, everything legally structured. His voice was cool, controlled. "We'll present it as a straightforward business solution." Tomas and Patricia exchanged glances, but began gathering their papers. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the conference table as they worked out the details. Maggie drummed her fingers on the conference room table while her attorney, James Chen, reviewed the municipal codes one more time. Morning sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, casting striped shadows across the scattered papers. "Legally, it's possible," James said finally, removing his reading glasses. "A marriage of convenience for grant purposes isn't new, but Maggie..." He leaned forward. "You need to understand what you're getting into. This is still a legal marriage, even if temporary." "I know, James." Maggie rubbed her temples. "But we're talking about 300 meals a week, jobs for 5 part-time staff, the after-school program. Just be careful. Get everything in writing, and I mean everything." Before Maggie could respond, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Ms. Cole, this is Tomas Rivera from the Marlowe Foundation." The voice was professional, pleasant. "We've noticed your center's recent grant application. Would you be interested in discussing potential funding opportunities?" Maggie's heart skipped. The Marlowe Foundation? Yes, of course. They arranged to meet the next morning at the Daily Grind, a cafe halfway between downtown and Willow Lane. Maggie spent the rest of the afternoon trying not to overthink it. The next morning, Maggie pushed open the cafe door at exactly 9 o'clock. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air. A man in an impeccable grey suit sat alone at a corner table, checking his watch. She recognized him immediately from news photos, Elliot Marlowe himself, not some foundation representative. He stood as she approached, his movements precise. "Ms. Cole, thank you for coming." "Mr. Marlowe." She settled into the chair across from him, noting his perfectly pressed shirt, the careful way he'd positioned his coffee cup on its saucer. "I thought I was meeting with your foundation director." "I prefer to handle certain matters personally." He folded his hands on the table. "I'll be direct. We're aware of your center's situation with the municipal grant requirements. I have a proposal that could solve your problem." A server appeared with a coffee pot. Maggie waited until he'd filled her cup before responding. "I'm listening." Elliot outlined the terms efficiently. A 1-year marriage contract, purely legal, with clear dissolution parameters. They would maintain separate residences. No romantic obligations. The center would receive a monthly stipend for operational costs. "And the counseling sessions?" Maggie asked, remembering James's advice to get everything clear. 2 sessions required by the grant terms, quarterly public appearances to demonstrate community involvement. He slid a folder across the table. "Everything is detailed here. My attorneys have structured it to protect both parties." Maggie opened the folder, scanning the first page. The language was surprisingly straightforward. "Why are you doing this?" Something flickered in his eyes, so brief she might have imagined it. "The center provides valuable services. This is a practical solution to maintain those services. She studied him over her coffee cup. His manner was reserved, almost clinical, but she sensed something else beneath the surface. You visited the center yesterday, didn't you? The man Ruth gave a cookie to. He didn't deny it. I needed to understand the situation firsthand. They spent the next hour reviewing details. Elliot answered every question clearly, without hesitation. The terms were more than fair, generous even. But something bothered her. What do you get out of this, Mr. Marlowe? He paused, considering. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most efficient. Your center needs a local guarantor. I can provide that. Back at Willow Lane that evening, Maggie gathered Ruth and the core volunteers in the break room. She laid out the proposal, watching their faces. Marriage of convenience? Ruth snorted. Like some romance novel? It's just paper. Maggie insisted. A business arrangement to save the center. He seemed nice enough yesterday. Ruth mused. Though he clearly doesn't know what to do with kindness. Nearly jumped out of his skin when I offered him that cookie. The volunteers debated back and forth. Finally, Sarah, their youngest regular volunteer, spoke up. My little brother gets breakfast here before school. Mum works early shifts and... She shrugged. If this keeps the center open... That evening, Maggie sat cross-legged on her living room floor, the contract spread out on her coffee table. The terms were clear. 1 year, separate lives, everything properly documented. The stipend would cover utilities and basic repairs. The center could keep serving meals, running programs, being a home for people who needed one. She thought of Sarah's brother, of Danny, working his way through community college, of Ruth, who'd found purpose here after her husband died, of all the people who counted on Willow Lane's worn floors and leaky kettle and open doors. Taking a deep breath, Maggie picked up her pen. Her signature looked strange and small on the initial consent form, but her hand was steady. She snapped a photo of the signed document and sent it to the number Tomas had given her. It's done, she said when he answered. I signed. I'll have a courier pick up the original tomorrow. Tomas replied. Thank you, Miss Cole. Maggie set down her phone and looked around her quiet apartment. Nothing had changed, really. Just paper, just signatures, just a practical solution to a practical problem. But as she gathered up the contract pages, she couldn't shake the memory of Elliot Marlowe's face when she'd mentioned his anonymous visit to the center. That brief, unguarded moment when something real had shown through his careful facade. The municipal courthouse stood grey and solid against the morning sky. Its brick facade had weathered decades of rain and sun, much like the community it served. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the low-ceilinged hallway where Maggie waited, smoothing her simple navy dress. Elliot arrived precisely on time, wearing a steel-grey suit that probably cost more than the center's monthly utilities. His nod was businesslike as he approached with Tomas and their attorney. The clerk is ready, Tomas said quietly. They followed him to a small chamber where an elderly clerk, Mrs. Henderson according to her nameplate, hummed softly while organizing papers. A few curious courthouse staff lingered in the doorway, drawn by the unusual sight of Elliot Marlowe in their modest municipal building. Now then, Mrs. Henderson smiled, adjusting her glasses. We have all the preliminary paperwork filed. Just need to proceed with the ceremony and final signatures. The legal language echoed in the quiet room. By the authority vested in me by the state, I am authorized to join Margaret Ann Cole and Elliot James Marlowe in civil marriage. Maggie stood straight-backed, hands clasped. Elliot's expression remained neutral, though she noticed his fingers tapping slightly against his leg. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out. Mr. Benson, oh, it's wonderful to see you. Ruth burst through the small crowd, arms outstretched. Before anyone could stop her, she wrapped Elliot in an enthusiastic hug. "You look just like my old neighbor Tommy Benson. Same kind eyes, though you hide them better." Elliot stood frozen for a moment, then awkwardly patted Ruth's shoulder. A small smile, genuine, unguarded, flickered across his face. "Ruth," Maggie said gently, "this is Mr. Marlowe." "Oh." Ruth stepped back, eyes twinkling. "My mistake, but you still have kind eyes, Mr. Marlowe, when you forget to be so serious." Danny, who'd slipped in with his phone, was already live streaming. "This is so going viral," he whispered to Sarah. A local reporter from the neighborhood Gazette snapped photos, catching the moment Ruth's warmth cracked Elliot's careful facade. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat, still smiling. "Shall we continue?" They turned back to face her. The legal declarations proceeded. "Do you, Margaret Ann Cole, take Elliot James Marlowe as your lawfully wedded spouse in accordance with the laws of this state?" "I do." Maggie's voice was clear and steady. "Do you, Elliot James Marlowe, take Margaret Ann Cole as your lawfully wedded spouse in accordance with the laws of this state?" "I do." Elliot's response was quieter but firm. They exchanged simple bands, plain gold, chosen for practicality. The metal felt cool and strange on Maggie's finger. "By virtue of the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you legally married. You may seal your union with a handshake." Their handshake was brief but cordial. Danny's live stream caught the moment perfectly. The elegant businessman and the community organizer joining forces to save a neighborhood center. It would make for excellent grant documentation. The signing ceremony followed. Pens scratched against paper as they added their signatures to the marriage certificate. The notary's stamp made a decisive thunk. "Congratulations," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "The certificate will be registered today, and copies will be sent to both parties within 5 business days." Outside the courthouse, sunshine had broken through the morning clouds. Elliot looked slightly dazed, as if the reality of what they'd done was just hitting him. Maggie felt only relief. The grant requirements would be met. The center was safe. "Now then," Ruth announced, taking charge. "Everyone back to Willow Lane. We've got tea and those lemon cookies Sarah's grandmother made. No arguments?" she added when Elliot opened his mouth to protest. "It's tradition." A small convoy of cars headed back to the center. Maggie rode with Ruth, who hummed contentedly. "You know," Ruth said, "I really did think he was Tommy Benson for a moment there. Tommy had that same look, like he wanted to help but didn't quite know how to let himself." "It's just business, Ruth," Maggie reminded her. "Mm-hmm," Ruth replied, in a tone that suggested she had her own opinions on the matter. At the center, volunteers had transformed the common room. A congratulations banner hung slightly crooked on the wall. The ancient electric kettle wheezed out hot water for tea, and Sarah's grandmother's cookies were arranged on mismatched plates. Elliot stood near the window, looking uncertain, until Ruth pressed a chipped teacup into his hands. "Milk? Sugar?" she asked. "Just black, thank you," he murmured. Maggie watched him take a careful sip, noting how his shoulders gradually relaxed as the volunteers chatted around him. Danny showed everyone the live stream, which was already gathering supportive comments from the neighborhood. It was strange, she thought, how something so calculated could feel almost warm in the center's familiar walls. But then, that was what Willow Lane did best. It took whatever came through its doors and turned it into something like home. The counseling room felt like a doctor's waiting room trying too hard to be cozy. Beige walls displayed generic watercolor prints of landscapes, mountains shrouded in mist, lakes reflecting autumn trees, beaches with lonely footprints in the sand. Two armchairs upholstered in faded blue fabric faced a worn leather couch across a coffee table that had seen better days, its surface marred with water rings and small scratches that told stories of countless difficult conversations. A box of tissues sat ready on the corner, just in case emotions spilled over during the session, positioned with practiced deliberation. Maggie perched on one end of the couch, her hands clasped firmly in her lap, while Elliot chose the furthest armchair, his posture impeccable, as if maintaining physical distance might protect him from emotional entanglements. Dr. Sarah Chen, the court-appointed mediator, settled into her chair with a notepad balanced on her knee, her gentle expression revealing nothing of what she might be thinking about this unusual pairing. "Good morning," Dr. Chen said in a warm, professional tone. "I understand this is your first joint session as required by your marriage contract. Let me read the exact clause for the record so we're all on the same page about why we're here today." She opened a manila folder that had been resting on the side table, the paper making a soft crinkle in the quiet room. Both parties agreed to attend mandatory counseling sessions at months 1 and 6 of the contract period to ensure clear communication regarding community involvement requirements and to address any concerns that may arise. Does that match your understanding of the arrangement? "Yes," Elliot said crisply, his fingers lightly tapping the armrest once before going still. Maggie nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's correct. Those were the terms we agreed upon." "Excellent." Dr. Chen clicked her pen, the small sound echoing in the tense atmosphere. "Since this is an unusual arrangement, a marriage of convenience with community service requirements, let's start by discussing your expectations for the next 12 months. What do each of you hope to accomplish during this time?" The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second stretching uncomfortably between them. A heating vent hummed somewhere in the background, pushing warm air into the chilly October morning. "My expectations are straightforward," Elliot finally said, his voice measured and controlled like everything else about him. "I will fulfill the contract requirements to ensure the center receives its funding. I'll attend the required events and make the necessary appearances. Nothing more is necessary for this arrangement to succeed." Maggie's fingers twisted in her lap, the simple gold band on her left hand catching the light as she fidgeted. "I expect transparency and respect. This isn't a business acquisition, Mr. Marlowe. These are people's lives we're talking about. Real people with real needs who depend on the center. I need to know what you're planning, and I need to be consulted before decisions are made." "Please," Dr. Chen interrupted gently, raising one hand slightly. "Use first names here. This space is for honest communication, and formality can create unnecessary barriers." Maggie exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping slightly. Elliot, then. "I need to know you won't try to take control of the center just because you're helping us financially. These people trust me. I've built relationships with them over years." "I have no intention," Elliot began stiffly, his jaw tightening visibly. "Let's try a different approach," Dr. Chen suggested, leaning forward slightly. "Maggie, could you tell us what the center means to you? Personally? Help Elliot understand why this place matters so much to you?" Maggie's eyes softened immediately, her entire demeanor changing as she spoke about her passion. "It's everything. After my husband died 8 years ago, that place kept me going when nothing else could. The volunteers became my family when I had none left. We serve over 200 meals a week, provide after-school programs for kids who'd otherwise be alone, senior activities for folks who rarely get visitors." Her voice caught, and she paused to collect herself. "Some of our regulars don't have anywhere else to go. For many, it's the only place where someone knows their name, their story." Elliot shifted in his chair, his composed expression wavering slightly as something unreadable flickered across his face. His fingers curled around the armrest, then relaxed deliberately. "And you, Elliot," Dr. Chen prompted gently. "What made you agree to this arrangement? There must have been other ways to satisfy the community service requirement." "It was a practical solution to a legal requirement," he said automatically, his voice betraying no emotion. Then he paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face for just a moment. "I understand what it means to lose everything. Years ago, someone I trusted, a friend, a business partner, Elliot stopped abruptly, as if surprised by his own admission in this sterile room with its beige walls and generic art. "He betrayed you?" Maggie asked quietly, her head tilting slightly as she studied him with new interest. Elliot's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping visibly at the corner. "Yes, I learned not to depend on anyone after that. Self-sufficiency is more reliable." "Is that why you're keeping such careful distance now?" Dr. Chen asked, her pen poised above her notepad. "Even in this room, I notice you've positioned yourself as far from Maggie as possible." "I prefer clear boundaries," he replied, his shoulders straightening imperceptibly. "They prevent misunderstandings." "So do I," Maggie said, meeting his eyes directly across the coffee table. "But boundaries don't have to mean walls. They can be fences with gates that open when needed." Dr. Chen made a note, the scratch of her pen filling the momentary silence. "How do you both envision handling the required public appearances? The contract mentions several community events where you'll need to present as a married couple." "Professional courtesy," Elliot said quickly, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from his pants leg. "Brief appearances at necessary functions, nothing more elaborate than required. Actually showing up when promised," Maggie added pointedly, a hint of steel entering her voice. "And maybe making an effort to remember people's names when they're introduced." The session continued with practical discussions about schedules and expectations, Elliot's responses growing more clipped as Maggie's became more animated. They navigated the uncomfortable territory of how much physical contact would be appropriate at public events and who would handle questions about their sudden marriage. As the hour drew to a close, Dr. Chen set down her notepad with a sense of finality. "We've made good progress today, even if it might not feel like it yet. Remember, honest communication will be essential for navigating this unique situation. I'd like you both to practice using I statements when conflicts arise before our next session." In the hallway afterward, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows, Maggie turned to Elliot. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes earnest. "I know this isn't easy for you, any of it, but what you're doing will help a lot of people who really deserve a break in life." Something shifted in Elliot's careful mask, a softness appearing around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You're welcome," he replied softly, his voice lacking its usual crisp precision. They walked to the center in silence, autumn leaves crunching under their feet like brittle paper. The air smelled of wood smoke and approaching rain, the October sky heavy with gray clouds promising an afternoon shower. The community center came into view around the corner, its brick facade welcoming despite the peeling paint around the windows. Ruth was waiting in the kitchen, her silver hair escaping its bun as she bustled about, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of lunch preparation. Volunteers chopped vegetables at one counter, while others stirred enormous pots on the industrial stove. "There you are." She thrust steaming mugs of coffee into their hands without ceremony. "Sit, sit. We need to talk about the welcome potluck this weekend. The whole neighborhood's coming. Everyone wants to meet Maggie's mysterious benefactor. Mrs. Peterson is making 3 kinds of casserole, and the Thompsons are bringing their famous cornbread." Elliot looked alarmed, his fingers tightening around the mug as if it might shield him from the prospect of such social exposure. Maggie hid a smile behind her coffee cup, watching his discomfort with undisguised amusement. "Don't worry," Ruth said, patting Elliot's arm with familiar affection that made him stiffen momentarily. "We'll make sure you survive. Most of our folks don't bite, except maybe old Mr. Jenkins, but his dentures aren't fitting right these days. Now, how do you feel about Mrs. Peterson's famous potato salad? She insists on bringing it, but between you and me—" She lowered her voice to a stage whisper. "It sits in the sun too long every single time. Someone's going to get food poisoning one of these days, but no one has the heart to tell her." The flash of cameras made Elliot blink. He stood stiffly beside Maggie, holding an oversized check for the local newspaper. The community center's main hall buzzed with excited chatter. "And now, Mr. Marlowe, if you could shake hands with Mrs. Cole for another photo," the reporter suggested. Maggie stepped forward with a practiced smile. Their handshake was formal, distant. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Of course, the contract requires it." His words were too quiet for the cameras to catch. Later that week, at 8:30 on a chilly evening, Maggie's phone rang. The center's ancient boiler had finally given up. "I've called an engineer." Elliot's voice was calm through the speaker. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, Elliot arrived with a repair crew. He shed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the basement while the engineers worked. Maggie watched him from the stairs, surprised by his willingness to get dirty. "You didn't have to come yourself," she said. "I prefer to oversee critical repairs personally." He paused. Will the seniors be warm enough for their morning activities? The question revealed a hint of genuine concern that caught Maggie off guard. Week 2. "And the very hungry caterpillar ate through one apple," Elliot read carefully, holding up the colorful picture book. A semicircle of children sat cross-legged on the carpet, entranced more by his serious delivery than the familiar story. 6-year-old Sophie raised her hand. "Mr. Elliot, you're doing the voices wrong." A ripple of giggles spread through the group. Elliot cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable until he caught Maggie's encouraging nod from the doorway. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "you could show me how." Sophie jumped up and began dramatically acting out the caterpillar's hunger. Soon all the children were participating, and the ghost of a smile crossed Elliot's face. Week 3. "The Martinez family's electricity is about to be cut off," Maggie told him during their weekly check-in. "Mrs. Martinez lost her job last month. They have 3 kids." Elliot nodded once. That afternoon, Thomas called with news that an anonymous donor had covered the family's utilities for 6 months. "I know it was you," Maggie confronted Elliot the next day. "We need to be transparent about help like this." "The contract doesn't require—" "This isn't about the contract anymore," she interrupted. "These are real people with dignity. They deserve to know who's helping them." Elliot was quiet for a long moment. Would it be acceptable to establish a formal emergency assistance fund through the center, properly documented? "Yes," Maggie said. "That would work." Later that week, Danny, their teenage volunteer, helped Maggie sort donations. "I got accepted to state," he said quietly. "But the scholarship fell through. Mom says we can't afford it." Maggie's heart sank. Danny had worked so hard, coming to the center every day after school, never missing a shift. What she didn't know was that Elliot had overheard while dropping off some paperwork. The next morning, Tomas presented Danny's mother with paperwork for a community achievement scholarship that would cover full tuition. "Did you know about this?" Maggie asked Elliot when she found out. "The center should support ambitious young people," he said carefully. "It's good business sense." But she caught the way he watched Danny's celebration with his family, a flicker of something warm in his eyes. The Friday night potluck 3 weeks after their courthouse ceremony transformed the community center. Fairy lights twinkled in mason jars, and every table groaned with home-cooked dishes. Ruth's famous potato salad had pride of place. "The video from your ceremony has over 10,000 views," Danny announced, showing Maggie his phone. "People are calling you guys the community couple. Look at all these positive comments about the center." Maggie glanced across the room, where Elliot was awkwardly accepting a plate piled high with food from Mrs. Peterson. He looked overwhelmed by the attention, but was handling it with surprising grace. "Try the empanadas," Mrs. Martinez insisted, adding more to his already full plate. "My grandmother's recipe. They're excellent," he said, taking a bite. To everyone's surprise, he asked for the recipe. The evening wore on, and the formal atmosphere gradually relaxed. Ruth told stories about the center's early days, making everyone laugh with tales of mishaps and miracles. Even Elliot's usual reserve cracked when she described chasing away troublemakers with nothing but a wooden spoon and sheer determination. His laugh, when it came, was unexpected and genuine, a warm sound that made several heads turn in surprise. Maggie found herself smiling too, watching this glimpse of the man behind the careful facade. "You should do that more often," Ruth told him, patting his arm. "Laughter looks good on you, dear." The tips of his ears turned pink, but he didn't pull away from her grandmotherly affection. As people began to leave, carrying empty dishes and leftover cookies, Maggie overheard Danny talking to his mother. "See? I told you Mr. Marlowe wasn't as scary as everyone thought. He's actually kind of cool, in a weird, formal way." The boy's words echoed the shifting perception that had started with that viral courthouse video. Frame by frame, day by day, the community was beginning to see what Maggie had glimpsed in moments. A man whose carefully constructed walls might be worth the effort to scale. Elliot's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid off the old cardboard box. Early morning light streamed through his floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. He hadn't opened this box in years, but the municipal hearing news had stirred something in him. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed newspaper, lay the evidence of his past vulnerability. Letters, contracts, and photographs from 25 years ago. His fingers brushed against a photo of 2 young men standing proudly in front of a small storefront. James Porter's arm was slung around Elliot's shoulders, both of them grinning with the innocent confidence of youth. "Your first real friend," Elliot murmured, his voice echoing in the empty house. The photo showed nothing of what would come later. The betrayal, the stolen patents, the midnight emptying of their joint account that left Elliot nearly bankrupt. He unfolded one of James's last letters. "It's just business, Elliot. Nothing personal." The words still stung after all these years. Across town at the community center, Maggie was helping Ruth sort through donation boxes. "Something's bothering you," Ruth said, folding a sweater with practiced movements. "Is it about Elliot?" Maggie sighed, setting down the box she was carrying. "I've been reading about his company's history. There are rumors about aggressive takeovers, Ruth. What if being associated with him brings that kind of attention to the center?" Ruth's weathered hands stilled. "You know, people said similar things about my Harold when he first joined the center's board. Everyone was convinced his construction company would try to buy up the neighborhood. What happened? He proved them wrong, one day at a time." Ruth smiled. "I see something in Elliot that reminds me of Harold, that same careful way of helping without wanting credit." Later that morning, Maggie and Elliot sat in the counselor's office, the space between them on the couch carefully measured. "Community integration is crucial for the grant requirements," the counselor explained, consulting her notes. The Harvest Jubilee is coming up in 6 weeks. It would be an excellent opportunity for public involvement. Elliot shifted in his seat. The stable rental costs are significant this year. We can't keep accepting your money for everything. Maggie interrupted. It's not charity, Elliot said quietly. It's investment in the community. The councillor leaned forward. Perhaps you could both contribute in different ways. Elliot with financial support, Maggie with organizational expertise. They looked at each other, a moment of understanding passing between them. The children's choir needs rehearsal space. Maggie conceded, and the stable would be perfect for the petting zoo. I'll have Thomas arrange it. Elliot nodded. No public announcement necessary. 2 days later, they found themselves at the first Jubilee rehearsal. The community centre's main room buzzed with activity as children practiced their songs and volunteers set up craft stations. Elliot stood awkwardly at the edge until little Sophie grabbed his hand. You have to help with the decorations, Mr. Elliot. You're tall. To Maggie's surprise, he allowed himself to be led to a stepladder, carefully hanging paper lanterns while Sophie directed from below. A little to the left, Maggie called out, fighting back a smile as Elliot adjusted the lantern with the same precision he probably used in board meetings. As the evening wound down and volunteers filtered out, they found themselves alone in the craft room, putting away supplies. Thank you, Maggie said suddenly, for not making a big show of the stable donation. Elliot looked up from the box he was sealing. I remember what it's like to need help but hate asking for it. Something in his voice made Maggie pause. She touched his arm gently, and he went still beneath her hand. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air seemed to crackle with possibility. Elliot's carefully maintained facade cracked just enough to show something raw and honest beneath. Maggie felt her heart skip a beat. Then reality crashed back in. The contract, the grant, the careful boundaries they'd drawn. They both stepped back simultaneously. I should check on the music sheets, Maggie said quickly. Yes, I have some calls to return. Elliot agreed, his professional mask sliding back into place. As they walked home in the gathering dusk, their shadows stretched long behind them. The news of the upcoming municipal hearing weighed heavily between them. They'll want to verify our community involvement, Maggie said, breaking the silence. Yes, Elliot replied, his hands in his pockets. Everything will need to be documented. They reached the corner where their paths diverged, Elliot to his glass house on the hill, Maggie to her small apartment above the local bookstore. For a moment they both hesitated, as if there were more to say. Instead, they simply nodded goodbye, each turning toward their separate homes as the last light faded from the sky. Monday morning, 5 weeks before the Harvest Jubilee, began with Maggie's to-do list sprawled across 3 notebooks, color-coded tabs sticking out like small flags of surrender. The community center's annual celebration had grown each year, and this time the pressure felt even more intense with Elliot's unexpected involvement. At 9 o'clock sharp, she started calling vendors, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Yes, we need 6 food trucks, not 4 like last year, she explained into the phone, tapping her pen impatiently against the desk. The permit's already approved through the county office. We're expecting at least double the turnout from last fall. She glanced up as Elliot entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee in biodegradable cups. He'd started bringing them every morning without comment, 1 black for himself, 1 with just a touch of cream for her. The sound system quote came in, he said, setting her cup down on the coaster she'd placed there yesterday. I had Tomas review the contract. He flagged a few concerns about the liability clause, but I've negotiated better terms. His efficiency still surprised her, even as it had become something she was beginning to count on. By Wednesday, their routine had settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt oddly natural for two people who'd been strangers just weeks ago. Mornings were dedicated to logistics and planning, afternoons for community coordination and meetings with local participants. Elliot surprised everyone by showing up in work clothes, khakis and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up neatly, to help build the stage platform where the children's choir would perform. "Never figured you for a hammer and nails guy," Danny teased, passing him another cedar board. "Thought you corporate types just signed checks and attended ribbon cuttings." "There's a lot you don't know about me," Elliot replied, measuring carefully before making the cut with a precision that spoke of practice. His hands moved with confidence, placing each nail with careful attention. "My father believed in knowing how things were built before you could manage those who built them." The following week brought new challenges that tested their growing partnership. Tuesday at 4 o'clock, the children's choir filled the center with sound and chaos as 20 elementary schoolers attempted to harmonize while fidgeting in their folding chairs. "Higher on the harmony, Sophie," Maggie called out, waving her pencil like a conductor's baton. "Remember how we practiced?" She felt Elliot's presence before she saw him, now familiar with his quiet way of observing from doorways, hands clasped behind his back, expression attentive but guarded. "They're improving," he said softly, not wanting to interrupt the rehearsal. "The high notes are clearer than last week. Thanks to the new music stands you ordered." Maggie smiled, noticing how the children stood taller with professional equipment instead of makeshift cardboard holders. "Though I wish you'd let us acknowledge the donation. People should know." "The music speaks for itself," he replied, his eyes tracking a small boy who sang with particular enthusiasm despite being completely off-key. On Saturday morning, they gathered at dawn to distribute posters, the sky still purple-gray as volunteers clutched travel mugs of coffee. Ruth had organized teams of volunteers, each armed with tape, staple guns, and stacks of vibrant flyers announcing the Jubilee. "Remember, business windows only with permission," Maggie instructed, her breath visible in the cool morning air. "And no telephone poles. We got fined last year." She caught Elliot studying one of the posters, his expression unreadable, fingers tracing the edge of the glossy paper. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer to see what had caught his attention. "First time I've seen our names together in print." He pointed to the bottom line, where the sponsorship information appeared in neat typography. "Sponsored by Elliot and Maggie Marlowe." The words hung there, making their arrangement suddenly feel more real than all the paperwork they'd signed. The moment was interrupted by Tomas arriving with urgent papers requiring Elliot's signature, his efficient pace slowing only briefly as he nodded a greeting to Maggie. As they walked away toward Elliot's car, Maggie heard fragments of their hushed conversation. "The tabloids are sniffing around," Tomas warned, his voice low but carrying in the quiet morning. "Your sudden marriage, the community involvement, it's attracting attention we didn't anticipate. The business press is asking questions too." 2 weeks before the Jubilee, Elliot received the call he'd been dreading since the announcement appeared in the local paper. His phone lit up with Claire's number at 8:30 in the evening as he reviewed budget spreadsheets in the quiet of the community center office. "A marriage of convenience?" His sister's voice crackled with disbelief through the speaker. "Really, Elliot? I have to hear about my only brother's wedding from my neighbor who saw it in the business section?" "It's a business arrangement," he said stiffly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It wasn't relevant to, like everything else in your life?" Claire's sigh carried years of frustration and unresolved conversations. "When are you going to let someone in? Actually connect instead of making everything a transaction?" Elliot ended the call quickly with promises to explain later, but Claire's words echoed as he watched Maggie coordinate the final details with volunteers. She moved through the center with natural grace, knowing everyone's names, remembering their children's ages, asking about sick parents and new jobs. Connection seemed as natural to her as breathing. The night before the Jubilee arrived, cool and clear, stars pricking through the indigo sky one by one as the sun's last light faded. At 11:30, most volunteers had gone home, leaving only scattered tools and half-hung decorations waiting for morning's final push. Maggie found Elliot on the back steps, staring at the stars, his suit jacket discarded, tie loosened. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, but not quite touching, the wooden step creaking slightly under their combined weight. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the evening chill. "I was thinking about my sister," he admitted after a long pause. "She called last week. She thinks I'm incapable of real connection, that I've built walls too high for anyone to climb." "Are you?" The question hung in the air between them, honest without being accusatory. Elliot turned, really looking at her for perhaps the first time, seeing the flecks of gold in her brown eyes caught by the security light's glow. "I used to believe that protecting myself meant staying distant," he said slowly, choosing words with unusual care. "But being here, seeing how you build community, it's making me question things I thought I knew for certain. People trust you. They know you see them." Maggie's hand found his in the darkness, warm and calloused from real work. "The center teaches us all something different. For some, it's that they can rely on others when they're in need. For others, that they have something valuable to give, even when they thought they were empty." "And what has it taught you?" His question was barely above a whisper. "That sometimes the most unlikely partnerships can work." She squeezed his hand gently, the wedding band he'd given her catching the moonlight. "Even if they start as business arrangements on paper." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight paint silver edges on the maple trees that bordered the property. Tomorrow would bring chaos and crowds and 1,000 details needing attention, but for now, this quiet moment felt like a gift, unexpected and precious in its simplicity. The sound of Ruth's ancient Buick starting in the parking lot broke the spell, its distinctive rumble carrying through the quiet night. Maggie stood, brushing off her jeans with her free hand, reluctantly letting go of his. "We should finish the lights for the entrance hall," she said, her practical nature reasserting itself. Elliot nodded, following her inside. They worked together seamlessly, passing strings of bulbs back and forth, their movements choreographed by 3 weeks of shared purpose and unspoken understanding of what needed doing. As midnight approached, they stood surveying their work. The center glowed softly, transformed from its everyday utility to something magical, ready for tomorrow's celebration. Neither mentioned their conversation on the steps, but something had shifted, subtle as a change in air pressure before a storm. "Get some rest," Maggie said finally, touching his arm briefly. "Tomorrow's a big day." "Indeed it is," Elliot replied, his voice carrying a weight beyond the simple words, eyes holding hers a moment longer than necessary. They parted ways beneath the newly hung lights, each carrying a piece of their shared moment into the night, the center now quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the whispered promise of something neither was ready to name. The morning air bit sharp and clean at 6 o'clock as volunteers arrived at Willow Lane Community Center. Dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds, and the sky held that perfect pre-dawn blue that promised a beautiful day ahead. Elliot arrived to find Maggie already directing traffic, her clipboard in hand and a thermos of coffee at her feet. She wore jeans and a warm sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "The tables go along the west wall," she called out to Danny and his friends. "Make sure they're stable. We'll have a lot of food on them soon." Ruth bustled past with boxes of raffle tickets, her grey hair escaping its neat bun. "Morning, you two. Elliot, be a dear and help Thomas with those speakers, would you?" He found himself rolling up his sleeves without hesitation, working alongside the center's handyman to position the sound system. The familiar weight of tools in his hands felt right somehow, grounding him in the moment. By 8 o'clock, the transformation was well underway. Streamers in autumn colors danced from the ceiling, and hand-painted signs directed visitors to different activity areas. The potluck tables filled quickly as community members arrived bearing covered dishes and warm greetings. "Mrs. Garcia's tamales!" Ruth announced triumphantly, making space on the crowded table. "And Jenny's famous apple pies!" The music started at 10, local bands taking turns on the small stage. Children darted between adults' legs, their laughter mixing with the melody of an acoustic guitar. Veterans gathered near the coffee station, sharing stories that drew small crowds of respectful listeners. "That's Mike Thompson," Maggie explained quietly to Elliot. "He started our veterans support group. Lost his leg in Afghanistan, but never lost his smile." At noon, the teenage dance troupe from the local high school performed. Their energy was infectious, and soon others joined in, creating impromptu dance circles that spilled out onto the lawn. Elliot watched it all, feeling strangely moved. He recognized faces now, the elderly couple who never missed bingo night, the single mum whose utility bill he'd covered, young Danny who'd received that anonymous scholarship. Mayor Helen Price arrived at 3, her presence adding an official air to the celebration. She toured the center, nodding approvingly at the improvements and stopping to chat with constituents. "This center," she announced from the makeshift stage, "represents the very best of our community. Today, I'm proud to present this certificate of appreciation to Willow Lane Community Center and its supporters." The crowd applauded, and Maggie stepped forward to accept the certificate. She looked radiant, pride shining in her eyes as she thanked everyone who had contributed. Then, unexpectedly, Elliot stood up. The room quieted as he made his way to the microphone. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "I came to this center as a stranger," he began, "an outsider who thought he understood community through spreadsheets and annual reports." He paused, meeting individual gazes in the crowd. "But you showed me something different. Mike, your courage in leading the veterans group. Mrs. Garcia, the way you feed anyone who's hungry. Danny," his voice softened, "your determination to be the first in your family to attend college." The room held its breath as he continued. "For years, I built walls to protect myself from pain, from betrayal. I thought success meant standing alone. But being here, seeing how you lift each other up, how you share both struggles and celebrations." He swallowed hard. "I've learned that true strength lies in connection, not isolation." Maggie watched from the side, her heart pounding as this controlled, private man laid bare his truth before her community. She saw tears in Ruth's eyes, noticed Danny standing straighter, proud to be mentioned. The applause that followed was genuine, warm, and touched with understanding. People came forward to shake Elliot's hand, pat his shoulder, welcome him properly into their fold. As evening approached and the crowds thinned, Maggie found Elliot standing in the new community garden. The setting sun painted everything in soft gold, including the fresh-turned earth where they'd planted vegetables just days before. "That was quite a speech," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "I meant every word." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Elliot," she began, but he was already moving closer. The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility. His hand came up to brush her cheek, and she found herself leaning into his touch. Their faces drew closer, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. At the last moment, Maggie pulled back, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "We can't," she whispered. "The contract. This was supposed to be just legal, remember? Is that all it is to you now?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know anymore." She wrapped her arms around herself, confusion clear in her features. "These past weeks, watching you with the community, seeing this other side of you, it's complicated everything." The garden around them buzzed with evening insects, the air sweet with the scent of late flowers. They stood in this liminal space, neither advancing nor retreating, while the last rays of sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The morning after the Jubilee dawned cold and grey. Maggie's phone buzzed at 6:30 with urgent texts from 3 different volunteers. Her stomach dropped as she opened the link they'd sent. The headline from City Beat screamed in bold letters, "Community Center Marriage Scandal, Tax Dodge or Love Match?" The article's tone dripped with cynicism. Sources close to billionaire Elliot Marlowe reveal his surprise marriage to community organizer Margaret Cole may be nothing more than a calculated tax scheme. Documents obtained by City Beat suggest the timing coincides suspiciously with municipal grant requirements. But that's not all. This reporter has uncovered disturbing connections to the notorious 2015 Jonah Systems whistleblower case, where former employees alleged systematic financial misconduct. Though charges were never filed, sealed documents hint at millions in questionable transactions. Maggie's hands shook as she scrolled through the article. Every tender moment from yesterday's Jubilee had been twisted into something calculating and cold. By 8 o'clock, her email inbox was flooded. The municipal board's message arrived first. "Dear Mrs. Cole Marlowe, due to concerns raised regarding the authenticity of your marriage status and its bearing on grant eligibility, the board requires your presence at an emergency hearing." The phone rang. It was Sandra Chen from the local credit union. "I'm sorry, Maggie, but given the circumstances, we'll have to put our annual contribution on hold." Before she could respond, Keith Martinez, a city councilman known for his grandstanding, was on the local news. "I'm calling for an immediate freeze on all municipal funds until we get to the bottom of these serious allegations." The center's main room, usually peaceful at this hour, buzzed with tension. Ruth wrung her hands as volunteers huddled in corners, whispering. Mike Thompson, the veteran who'd spoken so movingly yesterday, wouldn't meet Maggie's eyes. "How could you?" The voice came from Janet Weber, standing in the doorway. Her friend had been one of the Jonah Systems whistleblowers. "We trusted you, Maggie. Was any of it real? Or were we just pawns in some rich man's tax game?" "Janet, please." Maggie stepped forward. "It's not what you think. Save it." Janet's voice cracked. "My friend lost everything trying to expose that man's company. And you married him?" Across town, Elliot sat in his steel and glass office, surrounded by lawyers. The morning sun that usually energized him felt harsh, exposing. "We need to get ahead of this," Tomas urged, pacing. "Release a statement. Show unity. Something." Elliot's fingers drummed on his desk. "Have legal draw-up settlement offers for anyone mentioned in the whistleblower case. Double whatever they lost. Triple it." "Money isn't the answer here." Tomas pressed. The public needs to mind their own business." Elliot snapped. He softened, remembering yesterday's speech about connection. "Just handle it quietly. Protect the center. Protect Maggie." His phone buzzed. Another message from Claire. "Told you this would blow up in your face." By afternoon, the damage was spreading. 3 more donors had pulled out. The center's social media was flooded with angry comments. Someone had spray-painted fraud on the new garden fence. Elliot tried calling Maggie, Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, she answered. "I've got a solution," he said quickly. "A private settlement. We'll compensate everyone. Set up a separate foundation for the center." "Stop." Maggie's voice was ice. "You can't fix this with checkbooks and lawyers. I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me?" She laughed bitterly. "I stood in front of my community, my family, and vouched for you. Janet's friend lost her house fighting your company, and your solution is to throw money at it and hide?" "Maggie, no, I won't be part of another cover-up. These people deserve the truth." The line went dead. Elliot stared at his phone, remembering the trust in people's eyes yesterday as he'd spoken about connection and community. Now that trust lay shattered, and his instinct to retreat behind wealth and legal walls felt hollow. In the center's kitchen, Maggie sat alone, surrounded by yesterday's Jubilee decorations. The certificate of appreciation from the mayor lay face down on the table. Outside, she could hear reporters gathering, their cameras clicking like hungry insects. A text from Elliot lit up her phone. "Let me make this right. The foundation offer stands." She deleted it without responding, her cheeks burning with humiliation. The marriage might have started as a legal arrangement, but somewhere, along the way, she'd begun to believe in something more. Now those fragile hopes lay exposed and ridiculed in black and white newsprint. Ruth shuffled in, placing a cup of tea beside her. "What are you going to do?" Maggie squared her shoulders. "I'm not taking his money, and I'm not hiding. These people deserve answers, real ones." Day 1 started with a flood of notifications. Marriage scam trended locally. Comments piled up on the center's Facebook page. "Can't believe they fooled us all." What happened to transparency? My kids trusted these people. Maggie's phone buzzed constantly. She turned it face down on her desk, but Ruth's sharp intake of breath made her look up. "Someone posted my home address." Ruth's hands shook. "They're saying I helped cover up—" "Oh, Lord!" Maggie rushed to her friend's side. "We'll call the police. I'll have someone stay with you." "Don't bother." Ruth straightened her spine. "My Harold was a cop for 40 years. I still keep his shotgun clean." Across town, Elliot sat through crisis meetings. His PR team suggested a carefully worded statement. "While we understand community concerns, our commitment to Willow Lane remains steadfast." It sounded hollow, even to him. Day 2 brought Danny, shoulders slumped, clutching a letter. "The scholarship committee wants to review my application. They're saying—" He swallowed hard. "They're saying it might have been influenced improperly." Maggie's heart broke. This boy who'd worked so hard, dreaming of college, now another casualty of this mess. Elliot tried reaching out to board members. He arranged private lunches, called in favors, but doors that used to open stayed firmly shut. "Nobody wants to touch this," Tomas reported. "They're saying the optics are toxic." Day 3 hit like a hammer. Ruth received a brick through her window with a note. "Frauds get what they deserve." The police came, took photos, made promises, but the damage was done. That afternoon, 3 more families pulled their children from the after-school program. Elliot's conventional playbook, the one that had served him for decades, was failing. Money couldn't fix this. Influence couldn't smooth it over. Day 4 brought the email that changed everything. "Dear Mrs. Cole, my name is Jonah Pierce. You may have heard of me as the whistleblower, though that term makes it sound nobler than it was. I was just an accountant who found something wrong and couldn't stay quiet. I need to meet. There are things you should know about your husband." Maggie's hands trembled as she read it. She knew the name. Everyone in business circles did. The man who'd tried to expose financial irregularities at Marlowe Industries 8 years ago, then suddenly went silent and moved away. They met at a small diner on the edge of town. Jonah was older than she expected, with tired eyes and fidgeting hands. "He was my friend." Jonah said quietly. Before all this, we started the company together, did you know? That. Maggie shook her head. I found evidence of systematic overcharging on government contracts, small amounts spread over thousands of transactions. When I brought it to Elliot, Jonah's voice cracked. He said we could fix it quietly. Then the pressure started. Late-night visits from lawyers, suggestions that my daughter's college acceptance might be reconsidered. My wife's job suddenly in jeopardy. No, Maggie whispered. He wouldn't. He did. Jonah pushed a folder across the table. Here's copies of everything. The original documents, the threats, all of it. I kept it all, even after I took the settlement and ran. That night, Maggie waited in Elliot's study. When he walked in at 11:30, she placed the folder on his desk. Tell me it isn't true. Elliot's face went blank. That careful, controlled mask she'd watched crack open during recent weeks. Maggie, did you threaten his family? Did you use his daughter as leverage? The mask cracked, just for a moment. But in that flinch, she saw everything. You were my friend, she said quietly. Against all odds, despite the contract, despite everything, I was starting to trust you. Elliot's face crumpled. He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time since she'd known him, he had no words. Day 5 dawned grey and cold. The hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Maggie watched the sunrise from the center's kitchen, Ruth's shotgun on the table between them. What will you do? Ruth asked. Maggie thought of Danny's dreams crumbling, of Ruth's broken window, of Jonah's tired eyes, and the weight of 8 years of silence. The truth, she said finally. Whatever it costs, these people trusted us. They deserve nothing less. Across town, Elliot's study door remained locked. Inside, he sat in darkness, surrounded by the carefully constructed walls of his life. On his desk, a framed photo from the Jubilee, his first real laugh in years, caught on camera. Maggie stood in the center's main room, watching volunteers pack up for the night. Tomorrow would bring the hearing, and with it, choices that couldn't be undone. She wouldn't let the center become collateral damage in Elliot's war with his conscience. She would find the truth, and she would tell it. Not for revenge, but because the people who had built this community with their bare hands deserved nothing less. November 15th, 9 a.m., Municipal Building, Room 204. The hearing room's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as people filed in. Wood-paneled walls absorbed whispers. 5 council members arranged papers behind their elevated desk. Maggie sat in the front row, hands clasped tight. Ruth beside her, Danny slouched in the back. The tabloid reporter, Ted Winters, lounged near the door with a notepad. Council President Wallace cleared his throat. This hearing will examine the eligibility of Willow Lane Community Center for municipal grant funding, given recent allegations regarding the legitimacy of the marriage requirement. Maggie watched Elliot enter with his lawyers. His face was stone, tie perfectly straight. He didn't look at her. Wallace began reading allegations. Tax evasion, marriage of convenience, prior ethical concerns. The morning crawled. Council members questioned documentation. Lawyers presented rebuttals. Ted Winters smirked from his corner. At 11:30, an unexpected figure appeared, Jonah Pierce. He looked older than in their diner meeting, grey at his temples. I need to speak with Mrs. Cole, he said quietly to Wallace. Privately. They used a small conference room down the hall. Jonah's hands shook as he pulled out papers. There's more, he said. I didn't tell you everything before. He explained. 8 years ago, Elliot's company had discovered a flaw in their medical equipment. Fixing it would have cost millions. Instead of a recall, Elliot had convinced Jonah to stay quiet. He said we'd lose everything, Jonah whispered. The company, jobs, pensions. He made it sound noble, protecting people's livelihoods. The settlement bought my silence. Maggie felt sick. Did anyone get hurt? No, thank God. They fixed it quietly later, but I've carried this for 8 years. Back in the hearing room, Elliot took the stand. His lawyer guided him through prepared answers about the marriage contract. This was a legal arrangement, Elliot said smoothly, to benefit a worthy cause. Then Wallace asked about Jonah Pierce. Elliot's mask slipped for just a moment. His eyes found Maggie's across the room. She saw it then, the weight of decades of careful control, of walls built brick by brick, the cost of never trusting, never letting anyone close enough to hurt you again. I followed legal counsel, Elliot began mechanically. But something broke. Maybe it was Ruth's disappointed headshake, maybe Danny's slumped shoulders, or maybe just Maggie's steady gaze. I need a recess, Elliot said abruptly. In the empty hallway, marble floors echoing, he found her. I was afraid, he said simply. Everything I built, it all came from that first betrayal. When you have nothing, then build everything yourself. You spend your whole life terrified of losing it. So you became the betrayer instead. Maggie's voice cracked. I convinced myself it was necessary, protecting the company, the jobs, but I knew. Every time I saw Jonah's daughter graduate in the society pages, every bonus check, I knew. The center trusted you, Maggie said. These people trusted you. She stopped. I know. His shoulders sagged. I can't undo it, but I can stop hiding. Back in the hearing room, volunteers whispered in clusters. Ruth held Danny as he cried, his scholarship dreams crumbling. Maggie moved through them like a ghost, touching shoulders, squeezing hands. These were her people. They'd built this place with potlucks and donated furniture and endless hours of love. We'll survive, Ruth said firmly. We always have. That night, the center was quiet except for Ruth's kettle whistling. Volunteers had gone home. Tomorrow's headlines loomed. Across town, in his steel and glass house, Elliot sat at his desk. The same desk where this had started with a municipal notice and Tomas's note. He began to write, to the municipal board and the community of Willow Lane. His pen paused. For the first time in decades, words would have to be more than careful legal constructions. They would have to be true. 2 days after the hearing, morning light filtered through the community center's windows. Volunteers arranged folding chairs in neat rows while reporters set up cameras in the foyer. The clock on the wall read 10:45. Maggie stood near the back, arms crossed. Ruth touched her elbow gently. You doing okay, dear? I don't know what to expect, Maggie admitted, or what to hope for. At precisely 11, Elliot walked in. No lawyers this time, no polished suit armor, just a simple grey sweater and khakis. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He took his place at the makeshift podium, unfolding a single sheet of paper with trembling hands. Thank you for coming, he began, voice rough. 8 years ago, I made a choice that betrayed everything I claimed to stand for. When Jonah Pierce raised concerns about equipment safety at my company, I chose profit over principle. I pressured him to accept silence. Camera shutters clicked. Phones recorded. Elliot continued, each word measured and clear. I convinced myself it was protecting jobs, protecting what we'd built. But that was a lie. The truth is, I was protecting myself, my reputation, my control. He named specific details, dates, amounts, the nature of the safety concerns. No corporate speak, no hedging. To Jonah Pierce and his family, I apologize unreservedly. I've established a trust for full legal restitution and funding for any rehabilitation services needed. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start. Maggie watched the reporters scribbling furiously. But more importantly, she watched the volunteers. Danny stood straighter. Ruth nodded slowly. For my company, I'm instituting independent ethics oversight effective immediately. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations and board duties until new accountability measures are in place. He paused, turning slightly toward Maggie, though he didn't meet her eyes. Regarding Willow Lane Community Center, I will withdraw any financial involvement in the grant process if that's what's needed to protect this place and these people. My actions shouldn't cost them their center. Questions erupted. Elliot answered each one directly. No deflection or corporate jargon. Yes, he knew it was wrong at the time. No, there weren't other similar incidents. Yes, he would cooperate with any investigations. After the press conference, Maggie found him in Ruth's office. He looked smaller somehow, without his usual shields. That was unexpected, she said carefully, but not enough. It wasn't a question. No. Maggie sat across from him. Honesty is good, but we need more than words. She laid out her terms clearly. Community-led oversight meetings, regular public updates on the promised changes, a 3-month cooling-off period before he could take any advisory role. Complete transparency, she insisted. No more backroom fixes or quiet settlements, everything in the open. Even if it costs me? Especially then. Maggie leaned forward. That's the point, Elliot. Real change isn't convenient. It's not something you can just write a check for. He was quiet for a long moment. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't about saving face or damage control. It's about proving you actually want to be different. I do. His voice cracked slightly. I'm tired of walls. Maggie studied him. The proud man who'd first walked into her center seemed far away from this humbled figure. Then prove it. Not just today. Every day. Elliot nodded. Together they walked to the main room where volunteers were gathering. He repeated Maggie's terms publicly, agreeing to each point. By early afternoon, small signs of healing appeared. Danny returned to help with lunch setup. 2 elderly regulars came back for their usual card game. The municipal board sent notice they would reopen the grant review with additional oversight. Ruth served tea in chipped mugs, the familiar ritual somehow comforting. Baby steps, she murmured to Maggie. Maggie watched Elliot awkwardly helping Danny arrange tables. No grand gestures, no quick fixes, just the slow, hard work of rebuilding trust. Baby steps, she agreed softly. Monday morning, week 1. Jonah Pierce sat across from Elliot in a neutral conference room downtown, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, knuckles white. The trust account is set up, Elliot explained, sliding papers across. Full medical coverage, counseling, legal fees, whatever you need. Jonah's attorney reviewed the documents. No gag orders this time, no hidden clauses. Why now? Jonah asked quietly. Because I was wrong. Elliot met his eyes. And because hiding from that made me someone I don't want to be anymore. That same afternoon, Elliot attended the first meeting of the new Oversight Committee. Community leaders, ethics experts, and 2 former whistleblowers filled the boardroom. Their questions were direct, sometimes harsh. Elliot answered each one. Tuesday morning brought the first of what would become a ritual. Maggie found Elliot at 9 sharp, setting up chairs in the center's kitchen. Coffee? He offered. Black, 2 sugars. She accepted the mug. The mentoring program starts today. By 10, seniors filled the room. Elliot listened more than he spoke, learning their stories. Former shopkeepers, craftspeople, entrepreneurs with decades of wisdom. He matched them with local business students, creating partnerships that bridged generations. Wednesday, Tomas walked into Elliot's office at 8:30, resignation letter in hand. My kids are growing up too fast. he said simply. I want to be there. Instead of arguing, Elliot smiled. What if you ran the center's youth programs part-time, flexible hours, family-friendly? Tomas's eyes lit up. You're serious? Dead serious. We need someone who understands both worlds. The first Saturday brought unexpected joy. Elliot arrived at 7 wearing old jeans and work boots. Ruth directed a team of volunteers building raised garden beds. No suits allowed here, she declared, handing him work gloves. By noon, his expensive sweater was dirt-stained. But watching Danny and other teens plant seedlings, seeing Ruth demonstrate proper mulching techniques, hearing genuine laughter, it felt right. Week 2 began with Danny bursting into the center, waving his phone. I got in, full scholarship. Maggie hugged him tight while Elliot hung back, smiling. The acceptance email arrived at 9:12 Monday morning, a moment none of them would forget. The home repair team took shape under Ruth's leadership. Every afternoon from 2 to 5, volunteers tackled projects, fixing Mrs. Chen's leaky roof, rebuilding Mr. Rodriguez's porch steps, installing grab bars for elderly residents. Elliot learned to use power tools. His first attempt at hanging drywall was hilariously crooked, but no one mocked him. They taught him, included him, trusted him slowly. Week 3 brought the garden check-ins. Every Wednesday at 4, Maggie and Elliot walked the growing plots together. The tomatoes are coming in, she noted, touching a green fruit gently. Like the center, he replied, growing stronger every day. The oversight committee met again, reviewing progress. Elliot's company had implemented new safety protocols, anonymous reporting systems, and regular audits. Small changes adding up to real transformation. Final week. The municipal board scheduled their announcement for Monday at 5. All afternoon, people gathered. Volunteers, seniors, families who relied on the center's services. Mayor Helen Price stood at the podium as dusk painted the windows golden. After careful review, she began, and in light of demonstrated commitment to transparency and community involvement, the grant will be reinstated with conditional oversight. Applause filled the room. Ruth wiped her eyes. Danny high-fived his friends. Maggie found Elliot at the back, watching quietly. Thank you, she said softly. Not for the money or the marriage or any of that. For doing the hard work. For staying. He nodded, emotion making words difficult. Around them, their unusual family celebrated, Ruth organizing refreshments, Tomas's children playing tag between chairs, Danny explaining college plans to anyone who'd listen. The center hummed with life, stronger for having been tested, richer for the honest work of rebuilding. As darkness fell outside, light and warmth filled every corner. Elliot looked at Maggie. Coffee tomorrow at 9? She smiled. Wouldn't miss it. The evening wound down naturally. No grand speeches needed. Just people clearing chairs, washing dishes, making plans for tomorrow's programs. The quiet satisfaction of doing things right, one day at a time. The grant reinstatement was conditional, requiring ongoing oversight, regular reporting, continued community involvement. But those weren't burdens anymore. They were the foundation of something authentic and lasting. Ruth locked up at 8, shooing the last volunteers home. Enough excitement for one day, she declared. Tomorrow we get back to work. Maggie gathered her things, watching Elliot help Danny stack chairs. 4 weeks ago she wouldn't have believed this possible. But here they were, not perfect, not finished, but genuinely trying, moving forward together. The center stood quiet now, waiting for tomorrow's activities. Outside, crickets chirped in the garden beds. Inside, the coffee pot was set for morning, chairs arranged for the next day's programs, schedule neatly posted on the bulletin board. Small things, normal things, real things, just like the slow rebuilding of trust, the patient work of change, the daily choice to show up and try again. Not for recognition or reward, but because it was right, because community meant something, because walls could become bridges if you were brave enough to take them down brick by brick. The last light faded from the windows. Another day done, another beginning waiting with the sunrise. Dawn painted the community garden in soft gold as Elliot and Maggie walked between the raised beds. At 8 o'clock sharp, the morning dew still clung to tomato leaves, and zinnias bobbed in the gentle breeze. "The cucumbers are coming in nicely," Maggie noted, touching a curling vine. "Remember when you couldn't tell them from the squash?" Elliot chuckled, adjusting the watering can in his hands. "I've learned a few things since then, like how to actually keep plants alive." "You've learned more than that." Maggie's voice was soft but certain. They worked in comfortable silence, watering and weeding. 6 months had transformed not just the garden, but them both. Where there had been awkward formality, now lived easy understanding. At 10:30, a familiar figure appeared at the garden gate. Claire, Elliot's sister, stood hesitantly, holding a paper bag. "I brought muffins," she said. "Ruth's recipe, actually. She's been teaching me." Elliot straightened, soil on his knees. "Claire, can we talk?" she asked. "Really talk this time?" Maggie touched Elliot's arm. "I'll finish up here. Take your time." Brother and sister settled on the center's back steps. The morning sun warmed the concrete as Claire unwrapped still warm blueberry muffins. "Remember when Mom used to make these?" Claire asked. "Sunday mornings, before everything fell apart?" Elliot nodded. The kitchen would smell like butter and berries. Dad would pretend to read the paper, but really he was just waiting for them to cool enough to eat. "We were happy then," Claire said quietly. "Before the money problems, before the fighting, before you decided success was the only safety. I thought I could fix everything by being perfect." Elliot admitted. "Control every variable. Protect myself from ever being that helpless again." "But you weren't helpless, Elle. You were human. We all were." Claire's eyes filled. "I've missed my brother. The real one, not the carefully constructed version." They talked for hours, excavating old hurts, examining shared memories. Claire described watching him retreat into his work, building walls higher with each success. Elliot confessed his fear of vulnerability, how losing their parents young had taught him to trust only himself. "But look at you now." Claire gestured to the garden, the center, the community he'd joined. "You're living again, not just existing." By afternoon, something had shifted between them. Old wounds began to heal under the gentle sunlight. Evening brought warmth and celebration. The center's main room glowed with string lights. Volunteers bustled in the kitchen, laying out Ruth's famous vegetable soup, fresh bread, and apple pies. Mayor Helen Price chatted with Tomas while his children played tag around the tables. Danny proudly showed off his college acceptance letter. Jonah, no longer afraid, shared stories of his recovery journey. Ruth supervised it all, occasionally shooting fond glances at the unlikely family she'd helped forge. At 8 o'clock, Elliot stood, holding a worn book. The room quieted. "This was my favorite story as a child," he began, voice thick with emotion. "Our mother read it to us when we were scared or sad. I'd like to share it now." He read about a lonely tree that learned to trust spring would come again, that new growth follows winter, that hope takes root in unexpected places. His voice caught on certain phrases, but he continued, letting them see his heart. When he finished, Maggie stood beside him. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining. "6 months ago, we made legal promises," she said, Tonight, I want to make real ones. I promise to be your partner in this work of building community, to choose honesty over easy answers, to remind you that vulnerability isn't weakness." Elliot's eyes shone. "I promise to stay present, to keep learning, to trust in small acts of daily care, to remember that true strength lies in connection, not isolation." The gathering continued late into the night. At 11, most guests had gone home. Only a small circle remained. Several seniors settled in comfortable chairs while Elliot read another story. Maggie watched from the doorway, heart full. 6 months since that sterile courthouse ceremony. 6 months of growth, challenge, and genuine change. Ruth appeared beside her, patting her hand. "Who'd have thought that cold legal arrangement would grow into this?" she whispered. Elliot's voice rose and fell, bringing the story to life. His free hand held Maggie's, warm and sure. Outside, their garden grew under starlight. Inside, their unusual family had taken root and flourished. 6 months since they'd signed those papers, a lifetime of possibilities ahead.